Laura Samuels was a 34-year-old marketing executive living in Sacramento, California. She worked at a big company called Bright Ideas Marketing. Laura was well known at work for her ambitious nature and drive to succeed. She balanced her busy job with a warm and friendly personality, which made her popular among her coworkers and friends. Laura loved outdoor activities, especially hiking and camping. She often took trips to Yosemite National Park and Lake Tahoe. She was also a member of a local book club, where she enjoyed discussing her favorite novels by the author Joyce Lehman. Laura's friends described her as kind-hearted and always ready to help others. She had a bright smile that could light up a room. In June 2010, Laura was planning a special camping trip with her family. She and her husband, Carl, along with their two children, Ponderosa, age 10, and Velveeta, age 8, were excited about their upcoming adventure. Laura had already packed their tent, sleeping bags, and food supplies. She had even bought new hiking boots from LL Bean for the trip. Laura's children were looking forward to roasting marshmallows and telling stories around the campfire. At work, Laura was expecting a big promotion. Her boss had hinted that she might become the new head of the marketing department. This promotion was a dream come true for Laura, who had worked hard for many years. She was excited about the future and looking forward to the new challenges and opportunities it would bring. Laura was also very close to her family. Her parents lived in nearby Vacaville and often visited to spend time with their grandchildren. Laura's sister, Emily, lived in Los Angeles, but they kept in touch regularly through phone calls and emails. Laura cherished these relationships and made sure to stay connected with her loved ones. In the days before her death, Laura was full of life and excitement. She was looking forward to the camping trip and the possibility of a promotion at work. Her friends and family remember her as a loving and caring person who always put others first. Laura's tragic death was a shocking and heartbreaking loss to everyone who knew her. On the morning of June 14, 2010, Carl Samuels woke up early to get ready for work. It was around 7:00 a.m., and the sun was shining brightly in Sacramento, California. Carl noticed that his wife, Laura, was not in bed. Thinking she might be in the kitchen, he went downstairs. To his horror, he found Laura's lifeless body in the living room. Laura had been beaten to death with a hairbrush. Her face was bruised, and there were signs of a struggle. Carl immediately called 911. His voice shaking as he tried to explain what he had found. He was in shock, unable to believe that his loving wife was gone. The 911 operator, calmly taking down details, dispatched police and emergency services to the Samuels home. Carl sat by Laura's body, tears streaming down his face, waiting for help to arrive. He felt a mix of grief, confusion, and disbelief. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Paramedics confirmed that Laura was dead, and police officers quickly secured the area. Carl was visibly shaken and struggled to answer questions. He kept repeating how much he loved Laura and how he couldn't understand who would want to hurt her. The detectives noted his distress, but also kept in mind that in such cases, the spouse is often a person of interest. Outside, neighbors started to gather, curious about the police presence. The news quickly spread through the community. Local TV stations, such as KCRA3, began reporting on the incident, mentioning Laura's name and describing her as a well-liked member of the community. By late morning, the house was a hub of activity. Forensic experts arrived to collect more evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the crime scene, and carefully bagged the hairbrush as evidence. Every detail was documented meticulously. As the day went on, the reality of Laura's death began to sink in for her friends and family. Calls and messages poured in, expressing shock and sorrow. The news of her death left everyone who knew her in a state of disbelief, trying to come to terms with the tragic loss of a beloved wife, mother, and friend. The Sacramento police responded quickly to the 911 call on June 14, 2010. Within minutes, officers and emergency responders arrived at the Samuels home. Detective Patricia Johnson and her partner, Detective Mark Hernandez, led the investigation. Detective Johnson, known for her sharp eye and dedication, and Detective Hernandez, famous for his thorough and careful work, immediately took charge. The crime scene was a disturbing sight. Laura Samuels lay on the living room floor, clearly beaten to death with a hairbrush found nearby. Blood was spattered on the carpet, and furniture was knocked over, showing signs of a violent struggle. The scene was otherwise clean, suggesting that the attacker might have tried to cover their tracks. The detectives began by securing the area to ensure no one could disturb the evidence. They carefully documented everything, taking photographs and making detailed notes. Forensic experts arrived shortly after to collect physical evidence. They dusted for fingerprints on the hairbrush, furniture, and door handles. They also took samples of blood and other potential DNA evidence from the scene. Detective Johnson spoke with Carl Samuels, who was visibly shaken and in tears. She asked him about the events leading up to the discovery of Laura's body. Carl explained that he had woken up early to get ready for work and found Laura in the living room. He had no idea who could have done this to her. While Johnson interviewed Carl, Detective Hernandez examined the rest of the house. He looked for any signs of forced entry, but found none. This suggested that Laura might have known her attacker and let them in. Hernandez noted the absence of defensive wounds on Laura's hands, which indicated she was caught off guard. Neighbors began to gather outside, watching the police activity. Some were interviewed by the detectives, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that morning. The community was shocked and scared, as Laura was well-liked and her death was a terrible blow to everyone who knew her. By noon, the detectives had collected all the evidence they could find. They bagged the hairbrush and other items for further analysis at the crime lab. The coroner arrived to take Laura's body for an autopsy, which would provide more details about the time and cause of death. Detective Johnson and Hernandez spent the rest of the day reviewing the evidence and planning their next steps. They knew they had a difficult case ahead of them, but were determined to find justice for Laura and her family. Carl Samuels, the husband of Laura Samuels, was the first suspect in the investigation. Carl was 37 years old and worked as a software developer. He was known to be intelligent, but also quite introverted, often spending more time with his computer than with people. Carl was a devoted husband, but in recent months he had become distant and stressed, which friends noticed. The police brought Carl in for questioning at the Sacramento Police Department on June 15, 2010. Detective Patricia Johnson and Detective Mark Hernandez led the interrogation. Carl appeared exhausted and heartbroken. His eyes were red from crying, and he seemed genuinely distraught over Laura's death. Detective Johnson started by asking Carl about his relationship with Laura. Carl explained that they had been married for 12 years and had two children, Ponderosa, age 10, and Velveeta, age 8. He admitted that their marriage had been strained lately due to their decision to participate in a wife-swap sex fantasy. Carl had pushed Laura to participate in this fantasy with another couple, Jessica and Kenneth Planters. This obsession had caused tension between him and Laura. When asked about the night of Laura's death, Carl stated that he had been working late on a state government contract for his job at a well-known tech company, TechWave. He said he went to bed around midnight and didn't wake up until the next morning when he found Laura's body. His alibi was weak since he had been home alone during the time of the murder. Detective Hernandez asked Carl about his relationship with Jessica Planters. Carl admitted that he found Jessica attractive and that they had sex with each other many times, but he insisted that nothing had nothing to do with the murder. He was visibly uncomfortable and kept fidgeting during this part of the questioning. The detectives noted Carl's stress and anxiety, but also his apparent grief. They asked him about any recent arguments with Laura. Carl mentioned that they had fought about the wife-swap fantasy and his interest in sexual experimentation a few days before her death. Laura had been upset and told him she didn't want to participate anymore, which had frustrated Carl. Despite his emotional state, Carl cooperated fully with the police. He provided access to his phone and computer for further investigation. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez were cautious but still considered him a suspect. They needed more evidence to either confirm his involvement or clear him of suspicion. As the questioning concluded, Carl was allowed to go home but was instructed not to leave town. The detectives continued to gather information, knowing they had to explore all possible angles in the case to find the truth about who killed Laura Samuels. The second suspect in the investigation was Jessica Planters, a 32-year-old yoga instructor. Jessica was outgoing and charismatic, known for her sociable nature. She taught yoga at a popular studio in downtown Sacramento called Zen Flow Yoga. Many people in the community admired her free-spirited attitude and ability to connect with others. Jessica was part of the wife-swap arrangement with Laura and Carl Samuels and her husband, Kenneth. She had developed an unhealthy obsession with Carl and had been trying to convince him to leave Laura for her. Detectives Patricia Johnson and Mark Hernandez brought Jessica in for questioning on June 16, 2010, at the Sacramento Police Department. Jessica arrived wearing casual yoga attire, looking calm and composed. Detective Johnson began by asking Jessica about her relationship with Carl. Jessica openly admitted that loved sexually experimenting with Carl and had strong feelings for him. She said she believed Carl felt the same way but was torn because of his marriage to Laura. When questioned about the night of Laura's death, Jessica claimed she was at home with her husband, Kenneth. She said they had watched a movie and gone to bed early. However, Detective Hernandez pointed out that there were no witnesses to confirm her alibi, making it weak. Jessica then talked about the wife swap arrangement. She explained that it was Carl's idea and that Laura had reluctantly agreed. Jessica saw it as a great opportunity to have sex with Carl. She admitted that she had been trying to convince Carl to leave Laura, but she denied any involvement in Laura's death. The detectives noticed that while Jessica was cooperative, she seemed to be hiding something. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the situation. They pressed her about her obsession with Carl and whether it could have driven her to harm Laura. Jessica maintained her innocence, insisting she would never hurt anyone. During the interrogation, Jessica's phone records were examined. They revealed multiple calls and messages to Carl, including some sent on the night of the murder. This evidence raised further suspicion, as it showed Jessica's intense interest in Carl. Despite her cooperation, Jessica's obsession with Carl and her weak alibi made her a strong suspect. The detectives knew they needed more concrete evidence to either implicate or exonerate her. They continued to investigate her background, looking for any clues that could link her to Laura's murder. As the questioning ended, Jessica was allowed to leave but was instructed not to leave town. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez remained determined to uncover the truth, knowing that Jessica's possible involvement in the crime needed to be thoroughly explored. On June 18, 2010, 4 days after Laura Samuel's tragic death, new evidence emerged that gave the investigation a crucial breakthrough. That morning, it was cloudy and cool in Sacramento. Detective Patricia Johnson received a call from a neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Turner, who lived 2 houses down from the Samuels' home. Mrs. Turner mentioned she had found something unusual while walking her dog in a nearby park called Land Park. Mrs. Turner had noticed a discarded bag under a bush near a picnic area. Inside the bag, she found a pair of bloody gloves and a smartphone. She immediately called the police, and Detectives Johnson and Hernandez arrived at the scene within 30 minutes. They carefully collected the bag and its contents, placing them in evidence bags to avoid contamination. Back at the Sacramento Police Department, the detectives examined the new evidence. The bloody gloves were sent to the crime lab for DNA analysis. The smartphone, which was locked, was taken to the tech department to be unlocked and analyzed. Detective Hernandez noted the phone was a newer model, an iPhone 4, which had just been released a few weeks earlier. While waiting for the results, the detectives reviewed their notes on the case. The bloody gloves suggested the killer had tried to dispose of evidence far from the crime scene. The smartphone could potentially belong to the killer or someone connected to the crime. Later that afternoon, the crime lab called with the DNA results. The blood on the gloves matched Laura Samuels, but there was also another DNA profile on the inside of the gloves. The profile did not match Carl Samuels, which was a significant finding. The tech department also managed to unlock the smartphone. It was registered to Jessica Planters, the yoga instructor and second suspect. The detectives found numerous messages and call logs between Jessica and Carl, including some from the night of the murder. Additionally, there were messages that showed Jessica's increasing frustration and jealousy toward Laura. Detective Johnson and Hernandez were surprised by this new evidence. The messages revealed that Jessica had been trying to manipulate Carl into leaving Laura, but her efforts had been unsuccessful. They now had a stronger case against Jessica, as the gloves and the smartphone linked her more directly to the crime. The detectives planned their next steps carefully. They knew they needed to bring Jessica back in for questioning with this new evidence. The case was starting to come together, but they still needed to ensure all details were thoroughly investigated. As the day ended, the detectives felt a renewed sense of purpose. The new evidence had provided a crucial lead, and they were determined to follow it to uncover the full truth behind Laura Samuel's murder. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. The third suspect in the investigation was Kenneth Planters, a 34-year-old personal trainer. Kenneth was known for his confidence and charm. He worked at a popular gym in Sacramento called Fit Life Gym, where he trained clients and participated in competitive sports. Kenneth was supportive of his wife Jessica's free-spirited nature and had participated in the wife swap arrangement with Laura and Carl Samuels. However, Kenneth had become increasingly jealous and suspicious. Detectives Patricia Johnson and Mark Hernandez brought Kenneth in for questioning on June 19, 2010. Kenneth arrived at the Sacramento Police Department wearing a Fit Life gym t-shirt and jeans. He appeared nervous but tried to remain composed. Detective Johnson began by asking Kenneth about his relationship with Jessica. Kenneth explained that they had been married for 8 years and had a mostly happy marriage. However, he admitted that the wife swap arrangement had caused tension. Kenneth confessed that he had become uncomfortable with the arrangement, as he was developing feelings for Carl Samuels and felt left out. When asked about the night of Laura's murder, Kenneth claimed he was at home with Jessica. He said they had watched a movie, Iron Man 2, which had been released a few weeks earlier, and went to bed early. Kenneth's alibi was the same as Jessica's, but the detectives were skeptical due to the new evidence linking Jessica to the crime. Detective Hernandez questioned Kenneth about his feelings towards Laura. Kenneth stated that he liked Laura and had no reason to harm her. He seemed genuinely upset about Laura's death and insisted he had nothing to do with it. However, his jealousy and discomfort with the wife swap arrangement were noted by the detectives. The detectives then presented Kenneth with the new evidence, the bloody gloves and the smartphone found in Land Park. Kenneth was visibly shocked and denied any knowledge of the items. He insisted that he had no reason to hurt Laura and was being truthful about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Despite his cooperation, Kenneth's weak alibi and growing jealousy made him a suspect. The detectives decided to keep a close eye on him while they continued to investigate Jessica. They believed that Kenneth might have more information about the crime and Jessica's involvement. As the questioning ended, Kenneth was allowed to leave, but was instructed not to leave town. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez were determined to uncover the full truth, knowing that the evidence was leading them closer to solving the case. On June 20, 2010, the Sacramento police made a breakthrough in the Laura Samuels case. After carefully examining all the evidence, they identified Jessica Planters as the murderer. Jessica, a 32-year-old yoga instructor, had developed an unhealthy obsession with Carl Samuels, Laura's husband. Jessica believed that if Laura were out of the picture, Carl would be with her. The detectives pieced together how Jessica went about killing Laura. On the night of June 13, 2010, Jessica had gone to the Samuels home. She knew Carl would be working late, and Laura would be alone. Using a hairbrush, she brutally beat Laura, ensuring there was no noise to alert the neighbors. Jessica then staged the scene to look like a struggle, hoping it would mislead the police. Jessica's motive was her deep obsession with Carl and her desire to replace Laura in his life. She thought eliminating Laura would make Carl choose her. Additionally, she wanted to frame her own husband, Kenneth, for the murder, ensuring both her romantic rival and unsatisfactory husband were out of the picture. On June 20, around 2:00 p.m., Detective Patricia Johnson and Detective Mark Hernandez went to Jessica's home to arrest her. The sky was overcast, reflecting the somber mood. Jessica was taken by surprise. She had been teaching a yoga class at Zen Flow Yoga when the detectives arrived. When they informed her of the arrest, Jessica initially tried to maintain her composure but soon broke down, crying and pleading her innocence. The police handcuffed Jessica and escorted her out of the studio. The news spread quickly, and local media, including KCRA3 and Fox 40, covered the arrest. The community was shocked as they watched Jessica, a once admired yoga instructor, being taken away by the police. Laura's family reacted with a mix of relief and sorrow upon hearing of Jessica's arrest. Carl Samuels was devastated by the betrayal, realizing that someone he knew and trusted was responsible for his wife's death. He struggled to come to terms with the loss and the horrific manner in which it happened. Laura's children, Ponderosa and Velveeta, were too young to fully understand, but they sensed the gravity of the situation. As Jessica was taken to the Sacramento Police Department, the detectives felt a sense of accomplishment. They had successfully identified and apprehended the person responsible for Laura's brutal murder. However, they knew the case was far from over as they prepared for the upcoming trial. The trial of Jessica Planters began on September 15, 2010, in the Sacramento County Courthouse. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Lisa Kamabakuro, a 45-year-old known for her sharp legal mind and strong courtroom presence, presented a compelling case against Jessica. Kamabakuro argued that Jessica's obsession with Carl Samuels and her desire to eliminate Laura as a rival drove her to commit the murder. She detailed the evidence, including the bloody gloves and the smartphone found in Land Park, which connected Jessica to the crime scene. On the defense side, attorney Michael Rachmanoff, a 50-year-old with a reputation for taking on challenging cases, argued that Jessica was innocent and framed by someone else. Rachmanoff claimed that there was no direct evidence linking Jessica to the murder and that the police had not thoroughly investigated other potential suspects, including Kenneth Planters. He also suggested that the DNA evidence on the gloves could have been planted. During the trial, Laura Samuels' family sat in the courtroom, watching with heavy hearts. Carl Samuels, Laura's husband, appeared distraught, often holding back tears. Their children, Ponderosa and Velveeta, were not present, as they were too young to witness the trial's emotional intensity. Friends and community members who knew Laura described her as a loving mother and a dedicated professional, making the crime even more heartbreaking. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On September 25, 2010, they returned with a verdict. Jessica Planters was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with a mix of relief and sorrow as the judge announced the verdict. Jessica showed little emotion, maintaining a stoic expression. Her plan to eliminate Laura and frame Kenneth had failed, and she now faced the consequences of her actions. During the sentencing phase, Laura's family members gave emotional statements. Carl spoke about the devastating impact of losing Laura and how it had affected their children. The judge sentenced Jessica Planters to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was seen as just by Laura's family, but it could never fully heal the pain of their loss. The verdict in sentencing had a profound effect on everyone involved. Laura's family felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. The community, shocked by the crime, began to heal, though the memory of Laura's tragic death lingered. Jessica's conviction sent a message that such a calculated and violent act would not go unpunished. As the trial concluded, those who knew Laura hoped to remember her for the vibrant and loving person she was, rather than the brutal way she was taken from them. After the trial, life slowly began to move on for everyone involved in the case. Carl Samuels, now a single father, focused on caring for his children, Ponderosa and Velveeta. He decided to move out of their Sacramento home, seeking a fresh start. They relocated to a smaller town nearby, where they could begin healing away from the painful memories. Carl took a leave of absence from his job at TechWave to spend more time with his children. He enrolled them in a new school and joined a support group for grieving spouses, finding solace in talking to others who had experienced similar losses. He also sought therapy for both himself and his children to help them cope with the trauma of losing Laura. Jessica Planters, now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In prison, she became isolated, with few visitors and little contact with the outside world. Her obsession with Carl and her misguided actions had led her to a life behind bars, far from the free-spirited yoga instructor she once was. Kenneth Planters, Jessica's husband, struggled to rebuild his life. He left Sacramento and moved to San Francisco, where he found a new job as a personal trainer at a different gym. He sought counseling to deal with his feelings of betrayal and confusion. Kenneth tried to move forward but remained deeply affected by the events and the realization that his wife was capable of such violence. In the years following the trial, those touched by Laura's life and tragic death worked to find peace and healing. While the pain of her loss remained, they found ways to move forward, carrying Laura's memory with them and striving to live their lives with the same warmth and determination she had shown. Thank you for joining us on this episode of True Crime Case Files. The tragic story of Laura Samuels reminds us of the dark consequences of obsession and betrayal. Stay tuned for more true crime stories, and remember, always stay vigilant.